Now, welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that simply asked you, what's the best Star Wars trilogy? As usual then, I'll also be reading and responding to some of your comments, as well as showing off some of the artwork that's been sent my way. And let's waste no time here and get right to the results, where we'll see that 66% of voters said the original trilogy was the best, 33% went with the sequels, and only 1% said the sequel trilogy was the best Star Wars trilogy. And yes, I will give a sort of disclaimer here, that since I myself am not a huge fan of the sequels, that's likely going to be reflected to some extent, perhaps a great extent, in my audience and hence in these results. In other words, no, it's not surprising to see the sequels do so poorly here, however, that's a really bad showing. And I think we could certainly have a debate about how well they do even if a more pro-sequel trilogy channel conducted the same poll, and I'm sure there are some examples out there that have already been done, so feel free to link them in the comments below if you want. Because I still don't think they do exceptionally well. I still think you'd find most fans would say either the prequels or the original trilogy was the best. And I want to emphasize best because do remember this poll isn't asking if you like or enjoy the sequels at all, because yes, I do think more than 1% of voters probably enjoy them to some extent, or maybe enjoy one or two of the movies at least. But when it comes to stacking them up against the other two trilogies and asking which is the best, I honestly don't think a lot of fans are going to go with the sequels. Another thing here I thought might be interesting was to dip into my channel's analytics just a bit and show the age breakdown of my viewers to see if there's any sort of correlation there, perhaps to see if people were mainly voting for the Star Wars trilogy from their generation or that they maybe saw first. Though perhaps the problem with that is I think there's a lot of gray area there when it comes to what trilogy category you fall into, if you will. Which one you saw first, considering the 16-year gap between the end of the original trilogy and the start of the prequels. So if you're someone in your maybe mid to early 30s, mainly early 30s, to your late 20s, I'd say there's maybe about an equal chance that you'd been introduced to Star Wars first through either the originals or the prequels, or maybe you even kind of saw both at the same time. Whereas if you're in your late 20s or younger, it's much more likely, I think, that the prequels or even the Clone Wars, if you're very early 20s or even a teenager right now, that was your introduction to Star Wars. Whereas if you're 40 plus or even in your late 30s, I think it's highly, highly likely you saw the original trilogy first. And so kind of keeping that in mind, it looks like a good number of voters who would have likely grown up with the prequels or where it could have gone either way in that 25 to 34-year-old bracket, that a lot of them actually voted for the original trilogy over the prequel trilogy from their era. Now, what does that mean, or what should we maybe take away from it? Well, considering this poll was done for the fun of it, nothing concrete really, but it does seem to say that a lot of fans from that prequel era do think the original trilogy is the best trilogy. But anyway, let's get to the comments now and some of your artwork. But not before quickly saying thank you to everyone who votes, comments, sends in artwork, and watches the videos, as well as a big thank you to all my patrons who I always forget to thank. I greatly appreciate your support. Anyway, let's now kick this off as usual with the top rated comment, which this time came to us from ClownPuncher139 who said, "Sees 1% sequels. The remaining 1% will be hunted down and defeated," of course, quoting Palpatine. And then he did an edit here where he said, "I've started a flame war in the replies, a laughs in Sith Lord, good, good." Okay, and obviously this comment is meant to be a joke. It's meant to be humorous, and many people certainly found it that way and gave it a thumbs up or a like, which is fine. Because as I've said a million times before at this point, it doesn't really bother me, and it probably doesn't bother most people, if someone likes or loves the sequels, or even if they think they're the best trilogy ever. That's fine. I disagree with you, others disagree with you, but I can respect your opinion, and all I ask in return is to respect mine. For example here, I like the prequels. I love the prequels, always have, despite falling into that original trilogy age bracket or category that I was talking about before, and I've certainly seen plenty of people tearing those movies apart over the years, and sometimes brutally so. But guess what? It doesn't really bother me. It doesn't bother me when the shoe's on the other foot and I'm the one who really likes or loves something that others are tearing apart and enjoying tearing apart, even when I think people are maybe going a bit too far with their criticisms. Because I realize everyone is different. Everyone has different tastes. Everyone has their own opinions, perspectives, and or point of views when it comes to pretty much anything and everything. Heck, Star Wars taught me that everyone can look at the exact same thing and see it completely differently. They can see it from their own point of view, or to put it in their own sort of context if they want to. Yet at the same time, yeah, I do understand wanting to defend something you care about or something you enjoyed, or on the flip side, being upset when something you like or care about disappoints you. You want to let it be known why you're unhappy about it. In other words, long story short, before I ramble on and on here, I think people have forgotten that sometimes, oftentimes, it is okay to agree to disagree. And just because someone disagrees with you doesn't necessarily make them your enemy. It doesn't mean their defense or attack of something is targeted at you in particular, though I can see why it oftentimes does feel that way. And the sad truth of it all is, a lot of the time when you look past the differences, you'll find a lot more in common, like in this particular instance, that we're all Star Wars fans who care a great deal about it. We just don't always agree about what's the best part. And I think we can all agree, though, that yes, it would be nice if it were handled better all around, if we had more reasons to just be positive about it again all around. But anyway, let's now move on to this comment from Lord Draco III, who said, "The fan in me has to say that the original trilogy is the best, but the kid in me has to say that the prequel trilogy is my favorite." And then there's an edit here saying, "Holy smokes, I never thought I'd have a comment hit 1,000 likes." And well, I think the reason why you did indeed get so many likes is because obviously many share those exact same feelings, which I think kind of goes along with me talking about that age breakdown before. I think there's a lot of fans out there who would say that their favorite trilogy is the prequels, but that the best is the original trilogy. And we even had comments like this one from Seratano or this one from Nick Arnston that backed that up, along with many other very similar ones. And I think it's much like how my favorite Star Wars movie is Return of the Jedi, because I have the most memories attached to that one. But I think the best Star Wars movie is The Empire Strikes Back. And it really makes me wonder what kind of results I'd get if I changed the wording around here and asked what is your favorite trilogy instead of which one you think is the best. Would they be radically different or relatively the same? Moving on though, we have this comment from Me and Everything, who said, "OT, it's a classic and it's hard to beat it. Prequel trilogy, it has its flaws, but the world building is so good. And sequel trilogy, we got Kylo." Then there's also this comment from Michael Bowers, who said, "Execution of the movies, original trilogy, story and expansion of the lore, prequel trilogy. The sequel trilogy, well, it looks nice, I guess." We also had this comment from Sam, who said, "OT, the characters and story are still very compelling and iconic to this day. Maybe not completely perfect, but still a masterpiece and forever a classic. Prequel trilogy had incredible potential and definitely missed the mark, but has some great moments and strong world building. Also gave us our precious Clone Wars. Sequel trilogy tried too hard to replicate the magic of the originals, and you can tell the whole thing was made with conflicting visions. It has the potential to bring Star Wars to a new generation in a really interesting way, but we all know how that unfortunately turned out." Then here we have this one from Red Leader 327, who said, "The OT is the reason we have everything else. It also is a self-contained story, albeit with some flaws, and ends perfectly." And I pretty much agree with the basis of all these comments and the many, many others like them. I think the original trilogy is a smaller, more character-driven or focused story with an amazing, albeit not fully explored background that was executed extremely well, nearly perfectly. The prequels, on the other hand, were a much larger and more intricate story, not quite as character-focused, that all around just made Star Wars feel so much bigger. However, that story may have been a little too big for 3 movies, and I think, in particular, Attack of the Clones suffers from kind of a lot going on and a lot needing to happen in the span of 1 movie. And in theory, I think if it were broken into 2 movies, the whole thing would have been better, which is what I think the Clone Wars kind of ended up doing. When it comes to the sequels, well, I've gone over this many times before, but I think the lack of planning and being way too focused on recapturing that magic of the original trilogy, at least with The Force Awakens, were some of the biggest issues. There didn't seem to be too much interest in actually continuing the story that started with the first 2 trilogies. Instead, it feels more like a soft reboot. Okay, and next up here we have this comment from S134, who said, "The prequel era is my favorite, but mainly thanks to the media external from the movies. Phantom Menace feels too far from the rest, and Attack of the Clones, it's not very good. But the trilogy gets a huge boost for Revenge of the Sith, and of course the outer media around it. So my vote, it's on the original trilogy." Next, then, we have this comment from Dark Leom, who said, prequels, but not because of themselves necessarily, but also because they gave rise to the Clone Wars and Bad Batch TV shows. Then there's also this comment from that guy who said, the prequels are the best, and no, you don't need the 08 The Clone Wars to quote-unquote fix them. And I don't think the prequels needed fixing as much as they benefited greatly from having their story enhanced elsewhere via something like the Clone Wars. I do think they tell a story that is self-contained and can stand on its own, but one that is made better by more context by actually seeing the Clone Wars instead of just the end and the beginning of them, which we see in the films. Not to mention, a lot of the characters do just get far more fleshed out in the Clone Wars animated series. Alright, and since I've rambled so much, let's now just move on to some comments before wrapping this up. Starting with this one from Matthew Chenault, who said, the prequels often get hounded as being bad films, but in reality, the reason why people don't like them is because those who like the original trilogy either didn't like them because they didn't meet their expectations, or simply don't like the style of story Lucas went with. In many ways, I'd consider the prequels to be better than the original trilogy in many respects. The cinematography, the set designs, the addition of political intrigue, and the greater complexity of the plot make them stand out as an even more considerable achievement than the original trilogy, and cement Star Wars as the modern-day Shakespearean play. Contrary to what some on here would say, it did not ruin Star Wars or taint the original trilogy. Instead, it uplifted them and made them better than they were without them. There's also then this comment from Linkfin, who said, I absolutely love the tragedy of the prequels. The era is also super interesting. Also, we have this comment from Lewis Ballantyne, who said, the OT by far. The prequels have a good overarching plot, but it is only executed well in Revenge of the Sith. Next then, this one from James Walsh, who said, original hands down. Back then people had seen nothing like it before. It was a quantum leap in special effects. Then there's this one from Ivan Quintero, who said, original trilogy is some of the greatest storytelling in general. It might not have created the father-son trope, but it did make it extremely popular. Also had a comment here from Harris Syed, who said, the original trilogy is the gold standard for Star Wars. Then there's this one from Happy Rama, who said, objectively, the original trilogy, story-wise, the prequel trilogy. We also got this comment from George Camacho, who said, love the originals, but have to admit the prequels take it home with the music score and the fighting scenes. Then this comment from L. Mark, who said, to me the prequels and the OT go so well together that it's hard for me to consider them separate, but if I absolutely had to pick, I'd say the original trilogy just can't be beat. The prequels are poorly paced, which isn't a huge deal to me, as long as the story and world are good, but that's simply a flaw the OT doesn't have. Next up then, this comment from Dylan Hansen, who said, I love all three of them, but you can't beat the original trilogy. Also then this comment from Clickbait37, who said, my brain says the original trilogy, but my heart the prequels. Then this comment from Astromancer, who said, the prequels had a huge amount of world building that brings you to want to know more about the galaxy. While the OT had a great story and characters, the prequel trilogy leaves me with intrigue seeing the many moving parts. The planets, cultures, history, it all makes me want to seek out more. Also, we have this comment from Alejandro Velez, who said, original trilogy, old classic masterpiece. Prequel trilogy, flawed but an underrated masterpiece. Sequels, has no story. And finally here, this comment from Stereotypical Gamer, who said, seeing the sequels with 1% made me laugh so hard, but also makes me sad because it could have been so much better. I never sought out to hate the sequels, but with the misled potential breaking of canon lore and just non-existent planning, I just can't like it. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think is the best Star Wars trilogy and why. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.